score an important try when he was at Warrington. He was a cracking player. Nathan Hindmarsh in the NRL, David. He was one of the most consistent players I can ever remember.
He was a workhorse, wasn't he? Just an out-and-out workhorse. There's not many players who've worked as hard as he did in the game. It didn't matter what minute of the game, he was still working very, very hard in defence. He'd do a lot of the donkey work. He'd do a lot of the running up, running back, chasing back, a lot of the work some players don't like to do.
Yeah.
He put himself there and thereabouts every single time. So, yeah, he's worthy of a mention just for his dedication and hard work.
Sarah, what did our friend Tom have to say from the other side of the river?
Tom Andrews said, favourite all-time, without a doubt, Clint Newton. Brilliant rugby player, top lurk and fantastic wind-up merchant towards the dullers. Him and Dobson had such a great link-up, and I even saw him score a few 90-metre tries in his time at KR, easily in my top 3 Hull KR players ever. He's going to have a lot of players in his top 3, isn't he, at the minute?
I think his top 3, I think he went on to say, because someone asked him, I think it was Dobson, Newton, and
Benny Galea.
I don't think it was, but...
I thought I'd seen him mentioned, but maybe that was about something else.
I think it was... we talked about him last week. PNGian.
Stanley Jean.
It was Stanley Jean. But there was one season, you mentioned Galea, there was one season where Ben Galea and Clint Newton both made the Super League Dream Team, and that year they were both outstanding for Hull KR. It was only, I think they were good in other seasons, but that one season they were both outstanding. So I can sort of understand. And it would have been in his early, when he was like about, early teens, because Tom's such a baby face. Maybe he was 5 or 6 at the time. You're going to remember those times fondly.
True.
David Powell at St David 2911 got in touch, and he said the best Saints second row I have seen is George Nichols. He was also the best for Britain. George Nichols, I had to look up. He's before my time. I don't know if you remember him at all, David. He played in the 70s and 80s. He actually won Man of Steel, Harry Sunderland, and a Lance Todd Trophy. So he won all the 3 individual honours that get the big accolades. But when I looked into it more, he seemed to win all of those when he was playing at prop. So obviously it applies to the past as well, that second row and prop was interchangeable in this country, which is... but David, do you remember George Nichols?
I don't know, but I know a lot of locals speak very highly of him. And I remember watching, I think it was a late 1970s Cup final on TV, and he played, and I was astounded how well he played. He looked like a modern player back in the late 70s. That's why he stood out to me. So, it doesn't surprise me that he's been mentioned.
Good stuff. Who's next, Sarah?
So Joshua's granddad said, historical low and rows for Hull KR always scared me, a runner and a hard man. Currently Bateman head and shoulders above any other GB player. It's okay, I can decipher it. Minnie and Sika were a great pairing at FC. Unfortunately, they went one season too far. Favourite second rower, well before everyone's time, Terry Kirchin could do everything. Master of the offloads out of the tackle.
So I'd not heard of Terry Kirchin, and I tried to Google him and I couldn't find out much about him, but your dad did a bit of digging, Sarah, so why don't you share that with us, because it's a funny story about Terry Kirchin, I think.
Yes, so by all accounts he was an outstanding player. We picked him up from Barrow, I think people said, but he came originally from Rugby Union, and Rovers came sniffing for him, and we sold him to Rovers for £2,500, we think it was. However, we sold him to them knowing that he was planning on going down south to either to university or for a change of job. So he only actually played 2 games for them. So, that's serious money per game.
And to be fair, that would have endeared him forever to people like your dad on the terraces at the Boulevard, going and doing a bit of a swindle over the other side.
But yeah, I mean, people talk about what a great offloader he was, and ahead of his time really in that way, and won quite a lot of trophies like Yorkshire Cup and things like that as well.
Yeah, so a very, very talented offloader by all accounts. We had a few in on Facebook. We put this on our Facebook page as well. I'll just run through those quickly because they're all along a similar theme. CM Selby said, Dennis Betts, name me a better one for Wigan. I don't know why Mr. Selby's putting that as like a challenge, but we'll talk about that in a second. Stuart Minnis said, I bet it's Farrell all the way for you, Stato lad, which... Yeah, and Kieran Smith said Defo, Farrell and Bateman. So, I mean, without further ado, I think Liam Farrell is the best in Super League right now with the modern second rowers. I think it's criminal that he's not played as much in the international game, even though there is some absolute sterling players in the current international game that currently get ahead of him. I think over the last 5 years, 10 years, there's certainly opportunities where he should have played more, but he runs such fantastic lines. He takes those tough hits. He dishes out good defence as well. We're talking about a player who consistently, and we're talking his whole career, I've looked at the stats, he makes on average over 120 metres a game, and he makes an average over 30 tackles per game, and he tackles at 98-99% tackle success rate season in, season out, as well as throwing in tries and assists. He is part of the function of the Wigan team, how it's set up structurally, and maybe he wouldn't have been as successful a player 30 years ago, but in this modern era he is absolutely fantastic, and everyone knows I love Liam Farrell. Dennis Betts is another one though, and I'm glad someone picked out Dennis Betts, and I'm disappointed we had to get all the way to like the last couple of people, guys, to talk about Dennis Betts, because when we talked about fullback and hookers over the last few weeks, we talked about the players that came along that transition that position from the old style to the new style were players that started to emerge in the late 80s and early 90s in Australia. But I think the player that to me seems like the start of the modern back rower was Dennis Betts, and I can't think of a better line running back rower of his day than Dennis Betts. When I first started watching the sport, Dennis Betts always stood out to me. And he had Mick Cassidy alongside him in the second row as the more the worker kind of thing. It always felt like, and so he was kind of the unsung hero in a way, Mick Cass. But Dennis Betts, absolutely outstanding. One of the greatest second rowers that I've ever seen. And although it's been put as a bit of a challenge there, I'm going to struggle to name a better one that's played for Wigan, certainly that I've seen, than Dennis Betts.
I think of his time, he was a very good player.
I'd say he was exceptional, fantastic, but he's on my list. He came through when he was quite young in an emerging great Wigan team, and he was very modern in the way he played the game. He was very quick and strong and fit. Did a lot of work and could jump through gaps. You know, he spun that ball out and a gap opened up, he'd be through it when the defence was blinking. So I think he's an exceptional player. Was
he a player that? Similar age to you? Was he someone that you played against in the age groups at all? He came through in Salford, didn't he? So I'm not sure.
He was a little older than me, I think. He was a couple of years older than me, and he got into the first team very young. So no, I don't think I ever played against him. Mick Cassidy, I did. He's the same age group as Mick Cassidy. He played at St Jude's when I was at Blackbrook, and they were a decent team, St Jude's. He was one of the better players in that, and he was a very good player, Mick. Very tough. I played at Lancashire and North West Counties with him in the second row. But he kept climbing the ladder, Mick. Every time he went up to academy, he still played very well. You put him in the A team, even as a young kid, still played very well. His performance never dropped at all. If anything, it got better the higher up he got. And I'd say, he was playing his best rugby in the first grade. So someone spotted that ability in him when he was younger. Maybe it didn't stand out to us as much because he wasn't in as a great team. But if you can play well in quite an average amateur team, it shows you've got something about you. And yeah, he was a very good player, Mick, and a good tough second rower.
I'm going to pick out a list now of players that sort of range from the research that I've done of the deep history through to players whose careers kind of ended around about the early nought, so say 15 years ago or so, and some of the people that stand out to me either from the research I've done or from what I saw in the early days of me watching the sport. So I'm going to run through a few names, and Dennis Betts was part of this list actually, but the old school name that I'm going to start with is a guy called Martin Hodgson, who played a very, very long time for Swinton. He's the only player who's listed as a second rower who's in the British Rugby League Hall of Fame. He's in the International Rugby League Hall of Fame as well. So obviously a great player, and I believe he holds the record still for believed to have held the record for the longest goal scored in a professional game. It was kicked from 77 yards. So
that's amazing.
We're talking he kicked a goal from 80 metres away. It's absolutely incredible. And he was a Great Britain international at a very young age and played at a very high standard throughout his career, and I would guess maybe the greatest ever Swinton, one of the greatest ever Swinton Lions players that they'll ever regard. Another name is a St Helens player, Dick Huddart, who was an international player. When I looked through people who sort of played a lot of games in the second row for Great Britain, for example, he was a player who came out on that list, but I don't know a great deal about him other than that really. He might have gone and played for St George as well, I think, so played for both the Saints on both sides of the world. A very big name from the history of Rugby League, Jean Gallia, who is kind of seen as the founding father of the game in France. He was a back row forward. I think he deserved mention. Norm Proven, who was part of the great St George side in the whenever it was 50s and 60s, and George Trewick, who was part of the South Sydney side that won a lot of titles as well. So they're two Aussies in this. Then we move into the 80s. We've got Mark Graham from New Zealand, who was voted their best ever player in the first 100 years of Rugby League in New Zealand, and Paul Sirenen from Australia. They're two names that stand out very much from that era. And I've got Andy Goodway as the player who played for Wigan in that time as well. He was great. Gordon Tallis, he's got such an iconic image, hasn't he? That scrag tackle on Brett Hodgson in one of his later Origin games. But yeah, absolutely. Stephen Kearney for New Zealand ended his career in Hull for a season as well. And then Chris Joynt, the one who breaks my heart, because I can't help but putting him in this list of going through the generations of players who made a massive impact in that position. He was a great captain at Saints, a great leader, and I just hated him because of it.
Yeah, true.
So that's my sort of list of names that have jumped out as kind of like big names in the sport in that position. I don't know if anyone has anything to add on any of those players, or David, do you want to give us your list next?
Well, it's quite a long list, and you've already mentioned quite a few of those. I'll start with some, and there's probably more I could have added. Sonny Nicol, Gareth Ellis, we spoke about. Elliot Whitehead, I really like watching Elliot Whitehead play the game.
He's on my list of current stars. That is another list, because like I say, I love
okay.
But no, we can talk about him now. Elliot Whitehead's a fantastic player, isn't he?
I enjoy watching him play. Just the way he plays the game. He runs it well, and he's got an offload in him, a slight sidestep as well, so he can break teams down. I just enjoy watching him play. I've got John Bateman, Chris Joynt, Dennis Betts, Mick Cassidy, Roy Powell, one that hasn't come up.
Oh, yeah.
Remember Roy Powell? I'm pretty certain he played in every game of the 1988 tour when it was a full tour in Australia. Tragically passed away in his early 30s, but he was an exceptional second row forward. Mike Gregory played quite a lot in his early days at second row. Another one I've just thrown up.
I'd probably have Gregory as a loose forward, probably. But maybe that's just because the most iconic stuff I saw of him was with a 13 on his back for Great Britain.
And you know what? You're probably right. and I'll mention it now. A lot of loose forward's quite a coveted position in a rugby league team. You've got to be on top of your game to get that shirt. All the best players have that shirt. So very often when you see people like Paul Sculthorpe, Andy Farrell, and those type of players come in, the first in the